Today we're going to talk about elasticity. Elasticity in economic terms means the response by producers or consumers after there is a change in price of the good or service. And inelastic means quantity is not responsive to price, and elastic means quantity is responsive to price. And here is a graphical example of an inelastic demand example. And for elasticity, it can be applied mainly to supply and demand curves, and it can show what the characteristics of the service or good is just by looking at its elasticity. So when we're looking at an inelastic demand curve, you can see it is quite steep. So that is one of the characteristics of an inelastic curve, whether it is for demand or supply. A supply curve, an inelastic supply curve would be steep, but it would be sloping upwards like this. And another characteristic is, well, the price changes a lot more than the quantity. This is tied to the first one. So as you can see from these arrows, the price changes a lot compared to the change in the quantity. And this is for everywhere on the curve. If you move from one point to another, the price will change more than the quantity will. And that is why you can say that for an inelastic demand or supply, quantity is not responsive to price because price changes a lot more. For an example of an inelastic demand is the purchase of salt. So even in a lot of poor families, they still buy a lot of salt. So even if salt prices changes by 50%, so it increases by 50 cents, because the price of salt is already pretty cheap, the percentage change in the salt will not be a big difference. And that is why it is inelastic. So even if the price of the salt changes, 50%, the actual price of the salt will not change a lot because of the original price. It is really cheap. And therefore the demand will stay pretty much the same, and it won't decrease a lot even if the price is raised. For an example of an elastic supply, you can see characteristics of a flat curve, a relatively flat curve, and tied to that is the quantity changes a lot more than the price. So this is completely opposite of what we just looked at. And for elastic supplies and elastic demands, you can see a flat curve, which means if you change the price even a little bit or a lot, the quantity will change a lot more from a change in the price. So if you move from this point, the price will increase by this much, but the quantity will increase by a lot. So you can say the quantity is very responsive to the changes in price. For an example of an elastic supply, think of the production of diamonds. So if people demand a lot of diamonds, then prices of diamonds will increase, and so the producers or people who mine the diamonds will mine a lot more diamonds because the prices increase. But if the price decrease because people don't want diamonds anymore, then it is not profitable to sell diamonds because it takes a long time to get diamonds. So the suppliers will decrease their supply of diamonds, or the miners will mine less of diamonds, because even if there's a small change in price, because the diamonds is a luxury good, and so change in prices can really affect the quantity. For other examples, you can see that there can be a perfectly inelastic supply or demand curve, and that would just be a vertical line. And there can also be a perfectly elastic curve, which will be a horizontal line for a demand or a supply curve. And a unit elastic curve would just be a curve or a line with a slope of 1. That means the price will change proportionally to quantity. But usually these don't happen because it's very hard to get into these circumstances. For example, you can't really have a quantity that doesn't change in response to any changes in price. That would be pretty ridiculous. And perfectly elastic, you can't just have something that changes even a cent or something minimal, something really small, and the quantity will completely uh, change because of the tiny change in price. Some questions to think about. When are demand curves elastic? Well, if you think of elastic, you can think of price. If a price change, then the quantity will change a lot, which and then you can think of a circumstance in where people would um, people would buy something only if the price doesn't change, and if the price increases, then people will buy a lot less of the good. So you can think of something like a luxury mansion. Um, if the price changes, then people don't need to buy the mansion. So if the price increases, they will just not buy it. Um, and you usually would want to think of something that people don't really need. So it's not a necessity or a commodity, and that is usually something that is elastic because people will buy less of the good if there's a change in price, if there's an increase in price. And if you for supply curves that are inelastic, you should think of something that is a commodity, so something that is necessary in normal life, and something that um, people will produce no matter what the price is. So, as we discussed before, salt is an example. Rice is also an example. People will produce rice even if the price of rice it changes a little bit because it is a commodity. People will always buy it, so people will always produce it. And yeah, that's pretty much it for elasticity. Let us know if you have any questions about this. Thank you.